Food security, very important issue we are going to face in this world. Around 925 million people, million hunger people in this world. Around 1.4 billion people live on less than $1.25 per day. They are expecting that the world population are going to increase to be 9 billion people in 2050. And we already facing a lot of problems related to our food security in current time. How we can survive in this way till 2050? We have to find another alternative food source. We have to find a solution for this.
Okay, the main problem is that we have too few crops trying to feed too many people, and these are wonderful crops. The main crops of the world have been selected over the last 10,000 years because they have real properties, they have real characteristics that are useful to human beings, and that they ease of management, ease of mechanization. But they aren't the only crops, so we have to be much more imaginative for the future than relying on these few crops. We spend a lot of our energy and time trying to improve these major crops without really looking outside, without opening our eyes to what the alternatives are, not to replace the big crops but to add, to produce a wider range of crops that can feed humanity than the big three crops that currently feed more than half the world.
Well, I think the biggest problem might be uncertainty. Uncertainty and changing conditions in a way that we can't imagine today. Many studies say that agriculture gets much more difficult than today because conditions are uncertain and near and further future gets too uncertain. Farmers are faced with new problems. Acres change, plants, crops, animals will get problems because of temperature, because of too less forage, too low yields. So I think worldwide many farmers will stop running agriculture. This can lead to land which is left behind, and additionally land gets degraded because of floods or storms, as well as of drought, as well as because of humus degradation. So that's why agriculture gets more and more difficult and problematic, and it's more difficult to earn the money with agriculture. So farmers will leave their job, their farms. Soils are degraded, and well, where do you get food under these in this development?
The recent strategies have been more of the same. If you actually look at the crop production trends and the concentration on these three crops, you then see research follows the three big crops. So we then see all of our enormous technologies that we're applying, the biotechnologies, the management strategies, the economics, the industrial processes, are all geared towards these three crops. So we've become even more addictive. So if we look at crop improvement, the three big crops, let's say the top 10 crops, have had enormous investment in them. And the argument then is, well, of course, we'll continue to improve those three crops, and they'll end up becoming even more significant for future populations. there is no plan B then, because if we then invest only in those 3 crops and for one reason or another they fail, or they don't meet the demands of the population, or they have properties which actually don't completely provide nutrition and sustenance for, especially for poor people, we then have an over-dependence on these crops, and those crops then have to be moved huge distances because they're not grown in the places where poor people live. Much of those crops, many of those crops of course grow in highly mechanized industrial high input systems, and to make them then resilient and best suited to poor environments and poor people is going to be a very big stretch. I think we have to go back to diversity both in the species we grow. There are many species that have got very high nutritional values, they've got very good resistance to stresses, they grow in environments which are not suited to agriculture for the big crops. So we have to invest in those crops and we have to show really what their potential is. Not to out-yield the big crops in good conditions, but to produce sustainable and useful yields in the conditions in which people actually have to find themselves, in poor soils and in hostile environments. And we have to diversify systems. We've become addicted to monoculture because that shows a very straightforward relationship. We grow one crop, we mechanize it, we harvest it, we process it, we know what we're doing. We are very experienced on growing single crops. But actually, we've got to reconsider whether one crop, one plant, one species in the same field is the only option. And actually diversification of systems is important as diversification of species because it gives us more resilience. It gives us an insurance policy. If our main crop fails, one of the other crops will succeed. If the 2 crops work together, they may produce more than one crop growing by itself. And we've ignored those diverse systems, which of course farmers have managed for many centuries without really very detailed and scientific evidence to help them.
I think the experience of organic agriculture is a method that is a little bit better prepared to manage the problems of climate change. It's better prepared because organic agriculture is an expert in soil fertility management. Organic agriculture is an expert in, or has developed much better concepts for socio-economic life and socio-economic functions of agriculture. So that's why I think organic agriculture is better prepared to manage problems, but is in the same way faced with the problems as old methods of agriculture. So we should start to cooperate and exchange different approaches and different experiences for organic people as well as for conventional people. It's much more important to cooperate and to find common solutions. That's what I suggest for the future. Or not for the future, for today. We right now have to start with a better cooperation and with a better interest in finding solutions.
Let's look at alternatives and measure them properly, not get into too much advocacy and promotion and saying how wonderful they are without any evidence. All we're asking for is let's invest some of the research we spend on the major crops on other crops for which we have yet to create any evidence base. And once we have that system, not one crop by one crop, but a platform on which we can actually look at these crops in a quantitative, dispassionate, evidence-based way. And the crops will stand up for themselves. If they're any good, we'll find evidence for them. If they're no good, we'll tell you they're no good. But we have to have the chance to produce that evidence, because we don't otherwise have an alternative to the big crops of the world.